Hey, it's finally Foundation Friday. If you're new here on Fridays, I sit down and talk about a new or old, we don't discriminate here, foundation that I've been trying out. I do multi-day wear tests using a variety of tools, techniques, products, whatever. So if you're interested in learning more about the Pat McGrath Skin Fetish Sublime Perfection Foundation, then please keep on watching. Before I get into the review, I'm just going to give you a brief background on Pat McGrath Labs. Sephora has this little about the brand section, and all that states is Pat McGrath is one of the most influential makeup artists in the world, and the impact of her work in beauty and fashion over the past 20 years is unparalleled. The visionary looks she imagines then creates for runways, advertisements, and editorial define beauty trends of the future. On the Pat McGrath Labs website, there's a lot about her history as an influential and sought-after makeup artist, but there's very little information about the brand itself. In fact, under the Brands About Me section, there's only this one quote from Pat McGrath. Pat's career is widespread and unparalleled by anyone else. The Queen even made her a member of the Order of the British Empire for services to the fashion and beauty industry, and I can only name one other makeup artist that holds that title as well. She's been involved in makeup artistry for over 20 years, and she's a leading trendsetter in the beauty industry. And now, on to the review. The Pat McGrath Labs Skin Fetish Sublime Perfection Foundation retails for $68, and you get 1.18 fluid ounces, which is more than a standard foundation. There are 36 shades in this range that go from light to deep. I picked up the shade Light 6, which is fair with cool pink undertones. This shade is too dark for me, and you'll see that in the upcoming footage, but I'll address more about how I selected this shade later in the video. It is a long-wearing customizable foundation that builds from sheer to medium coverage in a wide range of universal hues that manifest the ultimate sublime skin standard. Medium coverage, natural finish for normal, dry, combination, and oily skin types. There are unique polymers that provide lasting wear, ultimate smoothness, and a luminous finish. High purity pigments treated with amino acids that deliver enhanced wear, a creamy feel, and a controlled and easily buildable coverage. And diamond core powder that enhances radiance and skin luminosity and decreases appearance of skin imperfections. A Vita Serum Complex moisturizes and helps fight the appearance of wrinkles, while Diamond Core Powder technology enhances the skin's texture and helps smooth and blur the appearance of fine lines, pores, and imperfections. The Silky Weightless Foundation imparts a filtered, soft focus luminosity. Suggested usage: sheer perfection using fingertips. Pump a few weightless drops of foundation onto the back of your hand and dot onto your cheeks, forehead, and nose with fingertips. Blend from the center of your face and move outward, patting and pressing for a filtered, blurred effect. Utilize both techniques. Begin by gently blending foundation in to even the look of skin tone, and then pat additional product into areas where more coverage is desired for a customizable couture finish. I'm going to insert some swatches here so you can see what this looks like compared to some other foundations. Pat McGrath foundation in the shade L6. Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush Flawless Foundation in the shade Too Cool. NARS Soft Matte Complete Foundation in the shade Yukon. Laura Mercier Radiance Perfecting Foundation in the shade 1C1 Shell. Rare Beauty Liquid Touch Weightless Foundation in the shade 160C. And now moving on to packaging. Honestly, the packaging is just simply stunning. It's the only foundation that I still keep in the original packaging. Every time I open it, it's just a luxury experience. The black with gold embossing is so elegant and timeless. The bottle itself is heavy and frosted. I don't think that it's glass. It sounds more like a hard plastic. And it fits perfectly within the palm of my hand. It's easy to shake, remove the cap, and pump all with ease. It comes with a pump, which is my preferred dispenser. I am going to do my best to describe my experience using the pump, but no matter how I've phrased this, it still doesn't seem like I'm saying it quite right. So I do hope that you understand what I'm trying to say. Depending on the pressure that you apply to the pump, it gives you back a corresponding amount of product. A light press will give you a drop, whereas if you press this down all the way, you're going to get some spray range. I do recommend pumping this foundation away from yourself because you can get messy, and yes, I'm speaking from experience. The pump also can get clogged, so if you haven't used this foundation in a while, I do recommend doing a test pump to get the hard bit dislodged first. The texture of this foundation is very thin and runny. It's lightweight, hydrating, and has a creamy feeling to it. It does dry down pretty well, but it's not quite a touchable powder finish. While it does wear comfortably, I am always aware that I'm wearing a layer of foundation. In order of my application preferences, I prefer using my fingers the most. Second, I would recommend using a brush worked over with a sponge. And third, I would recommend a sponge. Actually, I wouldn't recommend using a sponge at all. I found that that gave the worst application. I tried using two different sponges, and both sponges I felt gave a patchy application. It was difficult to build up coverage, and both sponges really just soaked up too much product, especially considering how expensive this is. And lastly, there is a faint perfume scent, but it is not long lasting and it's not readily apparent. I did have to go looking for a scent to find one. Before I get into my final thoughts, I'm going to insert some clips from my 3-day wear test. As always, day 1 is done without any additional products. I applied 2 pumps of the foundation using my fingers. I focused the majority on my cheeks since that's where I have the most skin issues. I used the EcoTool sponge to attempt to build coverage in my more problematic areas. I don't want to continuously mention the shade, so I'm just going to throw it in here and say that the shade is too dark. You can see it deepening throughout the footage, as well as the difference between the first application and at the end of the night. After 12 hours, the foundation has worn off almost entirely. I have a video going up with this look that should be up around the same time as this video, so more in-depth information will be included there. I primed using the Becca First Light Primer, which is the best primer that I found to use alongside this foundation. I used the Ulta Beauty No. 13 brush to apply the foundation to half of my face, and I cannot believe how amazing it looks and how much coverage there is from just that little amount of foundation. On the other side of my face, I used the $1 Billion Brow Sponge. I've really been preferring this sponge lately. I think it does a great job at applying thinner formulas because it's denser and doesn't soak up as much product. I still prefer patting the foundation out with the EcoTools sponge though. I don't think I was able to get as much coverage using the sponge that I was able to get using the brush. At the end of the night, you can see that it wore off on my cheeks and nose again almost entirely. There's also gathering around my nose. The places that still have foundation look really nice. No settling, creasing, and everything is still blurred. I primed using the Hourglass Veil Primer. I hadn't used this before, but the Sephora website recommended this as a similar product to the Pat McGrath Primer that is meant to pair with the foundation. This morning my skin is especially dry and dehydrated. It's soaking up every drop of moisture I apply to it, and nothing seems to satisfy its thirst. On one side I used the EcoTool sponge, and on the other side the $1 Billion Brows. I ended up applying too many layers, but it doesn't feel heavy and it was really comfortable to wear. It maintains a skin-like appearance. Even with the over application, it doesn't feel mask-like. There's no creasing, settling, and everything stayed blurred. At the end of the night, you can see though that when I swipe my finger across my face, it does move the foundation. Before I had ordered the shade, I had previously gone into a Sephora when this first launched to get shade matched. Shade 1 was too light for me, and I took shade 4 home with me in one of those little sample pots to try out, but I was really disappointed in the foundation. And then after I had given up on this foundation, a little while later I had this little voice in the back of my head floating the idea that I needed to try the foundation again. And I had resisted the urge to pick this up, but when I saw a 25% off sale with the bundle with the concealer and the under eye brightener, I was just sold. I had chosen the shade L6 based on the shade descriptions and swatches that I had seen that really made this look like it would be a really great shade match, and it is when I first pump it out. The problem is that as soon as you pump it out, it starts to oxidize and it gets darker, and I wouldn't necessarily mind that it deepens up a little bit as it oxidizes, except that during the day it continues to oxidize. So when I first put on the foundation, it's a good, relatively good match, and then throughout the day it's not a good match, and then it's really not a good match. If you are interested in this foundation, I just don't think there's a great way to buy it online. Had I known that it darkens continually throughout the day, I very likely would have taken shade 1 home with me that very first day to see how that wore. Aside from the weirdness with the shade situation, I have no real complaints about this foundation. In fact, I think it's one of the best that I've ever used. What I think sets this formula apart from others that I've used is that it really elevates and enhances my face. I don't have a shade that matches me, so I do need to use additional products to tone that down. But if I did have a shade that matched, I would have no use for a blurring primer, for a concealer, for an under eye corrector. This foundation really is able to do all of those things. The level of coverage this provides is a highlight to an almost full coverage depending on what your application method is, and it always melts right into the face without looking or feeling heavy or like you're wearing a mask. My criticisms of this foundation are on the petty side, since I do really enjoy using this foundation, but there are a few things that I feel are worth mentioning. The descriptions on Sephora and the Pat McGrath website are different. The Pat McGrath website mentions that the foundation is luminous, self-setting, and post-perfecting, while the Sephora description states that it has a soft focused luminosity with no mention of self-setting or post-perfecting. My issue with this is that it's a truly natural finish foundation. Yes, you can pair it with dewy or luminous products and get a luminous finish, but with no additional products, this is not what I would call luminous. It does dry down. Is it self-setting? I think that's debatable, but it's not a hill that I'm willing to die on. It is post-perfecting. It wears beautifully all day. The longer I wear it, the more nice I think that it looks, and it always looks freshly applied. It never has that old look to it. It does truly blur everything, which leads me into my next criticism, that it doesn't do well on dry patches. I have dry skin that occasionally flakes. If I were having one of those days, I would not use this foundation. In fact, if you're someone with flaky, dry skin, I would avoid this foundation at all costs. One weird thing that I noticed when I was editing back the wear test footage is the foundation makes my blemishes look worse on camera than they look in real life. In real life, when I looked in the mirror, my breakouts, my texture were all really covered and almost imperceptible, but on camera it looked like the foundation wasn't sticking to any of my problem areas. My final thoughts. My experience with this foundation formula has been largely positive. I have no issue recommending this foundation to anyone who would be interested in it, other than those with really dry or really dehydrated skin. When I first started using this foundation though, I did notice that there was a learning curve. Trying out different primers to wear underneath this was really key in getting the flawless base that I do look for. So if you're willing to put in the legwork, I don't think that you'll be disappointed in this foundation. That said, if you are someone who's looking for a foundation that just works, this is not it. Obviously the price point is a bit steep, which is why I haven't picked up a different shade. If this is out of your price range, no worries. I will continue to look for a similar one to recommend in the future. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please give the video a thumbs up. If you have any other videos you'd like to see from me or any other foundations you'd like me to check out, definitely let me know down below. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I will catch you again soon in my next video.